Hey everyone, I'm Belle Reid and welcome back to another video. Lately, I've been preparing a bunch of new music for some upcoming live performances, and I thought that it might be a cool opportunity to turn the camera on and share a little bit with you about what I'm doing. The piece that I'm putting together is centered around my Eurorack modular system. So in this video, I'll share some sounds from the piece as it's coming together and also walk you through the patch, breaking down what specific modules are being used and generally how the patch works. All right, let's do the thing. Over here. Okay, so the main concept for this piece actually began when I was working on my multi-mod demo. If you're not familiar, multi-mod is a new Eurorack module that Make Noise just released, which is a really cool multi-function CV tool. But as I was experimenting with multi-mod, I realized that you can also use it as a sound source and as an audio processor, which is really cool. And one of the techniques that I found particularly beautiful was using multi-mod as a kind of pitch shifting delay. So the sound source that I'm running into multi-mod is the Make Noise oscillator XPO. I'm running the XPO into the first input here on this VCA. The output from the VCA is going into multi-mod, and then the output from multi-mod is going into the second input on the VCA. So by patching it in this way, I'm creating a feedback loop here, which is a core part of this technique. If you're curious to learn more about multi-mod in depth, I'll leave a link below to my full video about it, which has many, many more demos that you can check out. So now when I play a sound from XPO into the multi-mod, we're going to hear that original sound, and we're also going to hear some pitch shifted and delayed copies of the sound. Oh, and by the way, I'm using the KeyStep 37 MIDI controller to control this part of the patch. It just wouldn't fit on my screen, so it's just below the synth here. So as you can see, this simple voice with just the XPO, the multi-mod, and an envelope from Maths controlled with the KeyStep is really flexible. I can get this kind of plucky sequence going. I can change the timbre on XPO and the articulation a little bit on Maths. And if I really increase the rise time here and the fall time on Maths, I can get into more of a sustained kind of swelling texture, which is really beautiful as well. Okay, cool. So that's one of the voices. Let's move on to another one. Really quick, before we move forward, I want to take a sec to tell you about my online class, Learning Sound and Synthesis. Learning Sound and Synthesis is a super comprehensive and step-by-step program that teaches you everything you need to make music with modular synthesizers, to design your own sounds from scratch, and to turn your synth sounds and patches into complete compositions and performances. Whether you want to make ambient soundscapes, melodic generative music, synth pop, techno, noisy, chaotic sci-fi sounds, or anything in between. When you join Learning Sound and Synthesis, you'll also get access to an incredibly supportive community of people who, just like you, are super passionate about electronic music and modular synths. And you'll also be able to get personalized support and feedback on your music. I typically offer learning sound and synthesis 1 to 2 times per year. You can learn more and join the waitlist for the next round by going to soundandsynthesis.com/waitlist. Learning synth and synthesis. So as I was building out this patch, I wanted to be able to create a secondary voice that could at some times kind of sit with the XBO voice that's a little more melodic, and at other times could play a really contrasting role. So I used the DPO for this one. I love the DPO personally because of its ability to kind of turn on a dime timbrally. In one moment, you can have it creating these really sweet drone-like tones. And then with just a couple of knob turns or a little bit of modulation, it can turn into this chaotic, noisy, gremlin-like creature, which I think is just really cool. So in order to interact with the DPO, I am using the pressure points here. I'm sending the first row of values over into the volt per octave control for the second oscillator here. And the second row of values from pressure points is controlling the modulation oscillator. Now, to create articulation with the DPO, I'm doing one of my favorite techniques, which is to use a keyboard to modulate both the strike and the control inputs on Optimix. So let me break this down a little bit. The first thing I'm doing is I'm using the touch gate output here from pressure points to strike Optimix. So when I tap the keys quickly, we hear short little plucked sounds. I can turn up the amount of modulation here, and those sounds can become more percussive and noisy. Now, I'm also using the pressure output from pressure points, and I'm running that into the control input on Optimix. So that's going to allow me to not only have a short pluck, but also a swell in volume if I sustain pressure on the touch plate. And then for an extra layer of control here, I'm also running the end of rise output from the left side of maths into the clock input on brains, which turns pressure points into a sequencer. So I can turn this on here and I can just have this sequence through. What's really fun about this is I can still interrupt that sequence by touching a touch plate. And I can also change the speed of the sequence pretty easily by adjusting the fall time on maths. So that's already pretty fun to play with, but over in Max MSP on the computer, I'm running this into a multi-tap delay. And I'm using an envelope follower on the signal coming from the synth to trigger randomization of the delay tap trajectory and also the delay time. So once again, the idea behind this is taking one relatively simple sound source and processing it in a way that it kind of transforms into this multi-layered and nuanced sound that can really easily evolve over time. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and turn up the dry wet mix here so that we hear some of the processing in Max as well as the synth. So the way that I was thinking about all of this is that the XBO plays a pretty melodic and rhythmic element in this piece. The DPO is more of a gestural kind of character that can kind of fly in and out of the scene and punctuate different moments in a more noisy and textural way. And then the third main element of this patch is the morphogene. So I loaded a whole bunch of different samples onto Morphagene that I thought were just interesting kind of sound worlds that I wanted to be able to access, and also things that I thought would kind of blend nicely with this world that I'm creating here with these two oscillators. Some of the sound material that I have loaded here into Morphagene is just from other sessions that I've done with other Eurorack gear. I have a couple samples of a Buchla 400, which is pretty cool. And then I also have some samples of the inside of a piano that is being mic'd with some contact microphones. So different things like scraping the strings of the piano or knocking on the strings of the piano and things like that. So let's just take a quick listen to some of the Morphagene samples now. So as you can hear, there's a huge range of sound within the Morphagene as well. Honestly, I think that the Morphagene could probably just be the entirety of a performance instrument, and it would be super flexible, maybe paired with like a fun controller or something like that. You could get a lot of mileage out of it. I have a continuous random voltage coming from Wogglebug that is going into the slide parameter on Morphagene. So that helps the samples kind of always have an internal life and some motion within them. So having continuous modulation is obviously nice because it means that elements of your patch kind of move with or without you, and there's always a little bit of variation. But something that I really, really love working with is tightly synchronized modulation that comes from some kind of gestural input, either a key press on a keyboard, or in many cases, some kind of external input from a microphone. So one of my favorite ways of creating interaction within a live performance patch is by using an external input that's connected to my microphone so that I can either play trumpet into the mic or sing. So here I'm using this Doepfer A119 external input preamp module. And what I love about this is that it has both an envelope out for the envelope follower signal, and it also has a gate out with a variable threshold level. So basically, this allows you to derive gates from the external input. So you can use the onset of a new sound or a new note that's being played into the microphone to trigger things within the synth. And in this case, that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm taking the gate out from the A119 and I'm using it to trigger random voltages over here on this little 2HP random module. And those random voltages are being sent over into Morphagene to modulate the gene size and also the varispeed control. Okay, so let me just combine the DPO, the Morphagene, and this external random triggering from the microphone together so that we can kind of hear all of those in action. Oh, and one other important element that I'll mention, I have an XLR splitter on my microphone. So I'm simultaneously running the signal from my microphone here into the synthesizer and over into my Max MSP patch, where I'm running it through the same multi-tap delay processing as we were hearing on the DPO. Ooh. Okay, so there's one other sound element here, which is this. So this little object is called Sound Witch, and it's made by Landscape FM. It's a really neat little electroacoustic object. It's just a couple of circuit boards and some clicky tactile switches and some other little things that kind of rattle and jingle when you move them. And when you plug it in to a amp, or in this case, into the modular, all of the little sounds of touching and moving it become amplified. So one of my favorite ways to play the sandwich is using a fine-tooth plastic comb like this, just the type of comb you get from a barber shop, for example. And of course, it's super interesting when you run it through effects as well. So the reason why I thought about using the sandwich is because I was hearing a lot of sounds coming from XPO and DPO that sounded very kind of classically electronic. And then some of the sounds on the Morphogene were bridging more over into the acoustic, electroacoustic territory. And I thought that the sandwich might be a nice way of bridging those two elements together. So let me just turn up the processing again here in Max so we can hear how the sandwich sounds running through the multi-tap delay. Yeah, so that is basically the most fun thing I've ever done. Okay, cool. So that is everything that I have going on in this patch. To quickly recap, I'm using the XPO as one voice. I am doing some pitch shifting, delay, feedback with multi-mod in order to turn each single note that we hear on XPO into a kind of cascading and harmonized voice. I'm controlling the XPO using the KeyStep 37 keyboard, which also allows me to create some latching sequences. And the reason in particular that I wanted to use the KeyStep for the XPO is because I did want to be able to play specific pitches and I wanted them to be easily in tune. The second voice that I have here is the DPO that I'm using for more gestural, kind of noisy, chaotic sounds, and I'm controlling those with the pressure points controller. And then the third voice is the Morphogene, which has a whole collection of different samples and sounds in it that I can access quickly by flipping through this organized control. I am running my microphone input here into the A119 in order to trigger new random voltages, and those are being sent over to Morphogene. I'm also running my microphone input into my computer so that I can process my voice in real time there as well. And then finally, I'm running the Soundwich into the external input here. And that's essentially just passing through the synth and into Max MSP, where I'm processing it as another element. So this is a ton of sound material, and something that I've really been enjoying over the last couple of weeks as I've been rehearsing is just finding different ways to kind of mix and match and contrast these materials with one another. I've found that sometimes it's really nice to sing into the microphone while playing really gestural and noisy sounds with the DPO and Morphogene. Other times it's nice to get kind of melodic sequence happening with the XPO and then bring in the Soundwich for a textural layer and so on. When I'm composing pieces, I'm seldom thinking about a very, very strict flow for the music. And more often than not, what I'm thinking about is how I can kind of create almost like a kind of musical playground, something that is a very versatile and flexible instrument that I can improvise with, and I can create a different piece of music with every performance just based on how I'm feeling and based on how the sounds guide me that particular evening. All right, awesome. So I hope you found this video interesting and maybe it gave you a couple of ideas to try out in your own patches. Building modular patches for live performance and improvisation that really have a focus on hands-on interaction and responsiveness is something that I'm really super interested in. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments if you have any go-to techniques that you find particularly rewarding or any tools that you're using in your practice for live performance that you really love. And if you're newer to this whole world and you're looking for a way to get started with modular synths and electronic music, I'll leave a link in the description below to a free mini course that I made that will help you get up and running and make your first patch from scratch using VCV Rack. And finally, if you are looking to join an amazing community of people who are passionate about things like modular synths and experimental music and sound design, or if you're interested in things like behind the scenes content and unreleased music, then I'd love to invite you to check out and possibly join my Patreon community. You can learn more about it and get yourself signed up by going to patreon.com/Sarah Belle Reid. All right, that's it for this one. As always, thank you so much for watching and for listening, and I'll see you next time.